Annexed Crimea is supposed to be the place where foreigners don't go. And the Kazantip festival, the rave festival, since early 90s has been the most prominent rave festival in the post-Soviet space. At first, the locals were a bit shocked by youngsters coming to party hard. Yet later, the festival had become the steady revenue of funds for the locals, for whom the money they get are usually just during the tourist season. Now the festival is banned for already 2 years, so it doesn't take place, and Hromadske correspondent went there to the village Popovka, where usually this festival had taken place before, and talked to the locals how their life has changed. Слухайте, а можна ще раз? Я дуже поспішала. Немає сенсу мені так старатися цю підводку робити такою дурною, і ніби це новини. Я зрозуміла, що я поспішаю, помиляюся, і це нікому не треба. Да. Просто спокійніше. Annexed Crimea has become the place where foreigners are not supposed to go. The Kazantip Rave Festival used to be the most famous rave festival in post-Soviet space since early 90s. Yet it had been banned after the annexation. At first, the locals were shocked by the youngsters coming to party very hard, but then the money they were earning were really helpful for them, as usually people get steady revenue just during the tourist season. And our own Hromadske correspondents had traveled to Crimea, and in particular to the village of Popovka, where this festival had taken place during the last years, and talked to the locals. Do they miss that festival and how their life is changed?
Подпрыгни еще, кричи ура. Ой, маленький ребенок, 1 класс.
Ну чого, добре було б, якщо б вернувся назад в Казантип. Хоч немножко уже было бы легче нам.
Наркотиков привезли бы сюда побольше, наркоманов.
Их везде.
Что, неправда?
И на Казантипе их полно. Кто хочет употреблять, то употребляет. А кто не хочет, то и так ничего. А что, вот сейчас приехали на эту, ну, на маевку, по богатым пошли, и все. Богатые опять заработали, а мы опять как были, так и есть.
Пенсия нормально, да. Проживем. Не прибедняйся. Спасибо Путину, что хоть там пенсию дал. Хорошую, можно на пенсию жить. Так что не прибедняйся, Маша, не плачь.
Ну, вот
не
очень-то хватает, не очень-то
хватает. Ну, если ты живешь на широкую ногу,
так
нормально.
где там на широкую? Тоже, допустим, вот какая-то чуть заначка есть, и то добавляешь до пенсии. Нормально.
Я сам недалеко здесь живу, но суть в том, что, я же говорю, люди только на отдыхающих жили. Да, когда только возрождался Казантип, жалобы шли от местных. Музыка, потому что ну, здесь пожилые все. Потом все почувствовали, когда что есть заработок какой-то хоть. И тогда уже все успокоились. А сейчас, наоборот, жалуются, что его нету, понимаете как?
Приезжали небольшие группы такие, ребята с девушками. Совсем как по пальцам можно перечесть. не то, что было в далеком прошлом, когда все здесь пело, звенело, танцевало, радовало. Было очень дружно, согласованно, интересно и достойно. Так кто клевещет, что здесь было безобразие, это неверные представления. Здесь было очень много интересных людей, интересной молодежи, интересные представления. И это радовало. Все живущие здесь и все, которые отдыхали здесь, они все хотят сюда вернуться.
And we have as our guest Tanya Cooper, who is Ukraine's researcher at Human Rights Watch. And she has just come back from Crimea, where Human Rights Watch has the rare visit to the annexed peninsula. So, Tanya, welcome. And what are the major findings? And it's rather rare occasions where you were able to work.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's true that Human Rights Watch hasn't been to Crimea since 2015, and it was time for us to go back there. We monitored the situation, we documented what was happening there throughout these years, but yeah, we did not go to Crimea for a while. And of course, what we found wasn't surprising. We have, since the occupation in 2014, we have been talking about massive human rights violations in Crimea, and the human rights crisis that was provoked by Russia's occupation of the peninsula continues for many people.
So if we go in details, because generally we, of course, understand the peculiarity of the annexed territories there, that the international organizations, compared to the occupied Donbass, can't work, like, for instance, the UN or the others, to be there legally. So really, what are the major points to address after your visit? What would be the case?
Well, Russia is an occupying power, and the de facto Crimean authorities should really address the existing human rights violations. And they were produced.
What are they?
And they were produced by this very fast, very swift, forcible requirement for Crimean residents to apply and to have Russian passports. That led to discrimination of those who didn't want to do that in spheres of employment, medical care, education. But of course, when we talk about the Crimean Tatar community, who were very outspoken in their opposition to the policies of the Russian government in Crimea, they continue to suffer marginalization, isolation, but also legal harassment of many of their leaders, and for that matter, any critical voice that peacefully opposes what's happening in Crimea.
So let's just really talk about those numerous cases. So, for instance, in Crimean Tatars, Hromadske regularly report on for instance, the cases of the Hizb-ut-Tahrir, so-called allegations of the terrorism, where a lot of people are detained for a while, and their families are in drastic situation. But there are the accusation of the extremism and terrorism. This is one part of the story. But really, what are the major things if we speak about general on the Crimean Tatar community?
Well, the community lost its representative body, Majlis, which is now an extremist organization in Russia and Crimea. And what this means practically is that not only the community that fought for their rights for so long, and with a lot of determination, with a lot of courage, lost voice, they also, anyone, leaders, members of the Majlis are effectively outside the law. They are effectively all extremists, criminals, in the eyes of the legal system of Russia, just because they want to preserve their involvement with Majlis.
But obviously, if you were there would be people saying, like, we've voted for that, we were supporting Russia. That's always the case, which is brought by some of the foreign reporters which are coming, and by the Russian state journalists who are saying that, like, you don't have the real conflict, and some of the people are satisfied. What have you seen?
Well, I mean, I have, I can accept that a lot of people actually wanted some of the, some of the changes that happened after the occupation. For example, some of the people wanted to be part of Russia, sure, but that shouldn't have come, their wishes and their willingness to support the actions of the Russian government in Crimea shouldn't come at the expense of so many others who didn't agree. And, again, like those people who didn't agree, who voiced their opinion peacefully, largely, they are right now are being prosecuted for their opinion and for their, unwillingness to accept the new policies.
When people are speaking about human rights abuses, they usually speak about the detentions, tortures, other things, and we know it used to happen. There are people who are like Oleg Sentsov, who are now in prison in Russia. He's not just the only one, there were the others. There are numerous cases. But really what I understand interesting is that you look to the other kind of also things, so like this regular everyday life of the people, which also, as I understand, can be considered some, a part of the human rights story.
Absolutely. And again, this is what we are talking about when we're talking about a human rights crisis, that it doesn't only apply to those who have a certain political position and they're not afraid to voice it, like a lot of leaders of Crimean Tatar community, but it's also, this human rights crisis that resulted after the occupation concerned just ordinary people who, for example, had to make a choice to either become a Russian citizen or lose access to healthcare for themselves and their children and their families. So, for example, we talked to people who had a family member dying in a hospital as a result of the fact that she was refused to be hospitalized because she wasn't a Russian citizen. We talked to a father who had 2 children who could not continue their education in Ukrainian language because the classes that were, they used to go to became Russian language classes. And, he had to, for example, send his son to Lviv to continue, to make sure that he can continue receiving education in Ukrainian language.
And what else you would say about the economical situation as well? How is it also, is it in your scope as well?
Well, we looked, for example, at cases of people either, either afraid of losing jobs as a result of their citizenship, which, was not Russian citizenship, or those who were actually forced to resign or, were fired because either, again, they didn't have a Russian passport, or they had a pro-Ukraine position and were actually activists at some of the public demonstrations that happened in Crimea, and as a result of that were fired from their jobs. And this one case that we documented was of a history teacher who was fired after he appeared at a pro-Ukraine demonstration.
How easy it was to talk to the people? Because what I think the challenge of covering Crimea, I myself try sometimes to go there, that if you are a Ukrainian reporter, you can have access to speak to the Crimean Tatars. You can have access if you maintain the contacts with the people you knew for a while, but they're usually very scared. It's very hard openly to talk to these kind of open pro-Russian authorities, because as soon as a Ukrainian reporter, you reach them, you can be then followed by the security service, and that's not the way you like to work. So you should work very, in a candid way. Vice versa, when the Russian reporters coming, that's very hard for them to really sometimes to show especially Russian independent reporters, they can't openly, due to legal restriction of the way they report and the punishment they may face for calling the Crimea occupied, they can't really talk to cover that part of the story. So really, how representative can be the coverage of Crimea, and how was it for you to talk and to have this picture, the real picture of what is the life there?
Right. No, it's a very important question. And actually, when I was in Europe talking to some of the members of the European Parliament and, the representatives of European governments, there is this lack of information that's coming from Crimea, and everyone is, wants to know what's happening in fact for people. Are they happy? Are they unhappy? What can be done? And this, I cannot emphasize it more, that this kind of black hole that Crimea is right now for many who don't live in Ukraine is done on purpose, of course. And Russia and Russia's policies in Crimea created serious restrictions for effective constructive human rights monitoring in the peninsula, and this must be addressed. Again, as an occupying power, Russia still has a lot of obligations under international law, and one of the obligations is really not to restrict international and other human rights monitors from accessing the peninsula.
So Tanya, I would also encourage our audience to watch our stories. We have Hromadske Crimea team, and we are translating and subtitling the best of the stories from the ground as well. There was a long piece we've done about the economic life, what is the life in Annexed Crimea 3 years after that. So that's you can find when you log into our web page. But to finalize, really, so what would be major things, advice, concerns to address as the results of your visit?
The main concerns that remain the same is to stop harassing and prosecuting Crimean Tatar community members for their, again, peaceful but insistent criticism of Russia's policies in the peninsula, to really take a look and start protecting the population and their access to, fundamental freedoms. Violations of which resulted after the occupation. And so, for example, as we talked about, allow education in Ukrainian language, allow people to access basic services such as healthcare, regardless of their citizenship, allow people to be able to access, to have access to employment and, again, other, spheres of their lives, without having to go through a forcible citizenship process.
Okay, Tanya, thanks a lot for what you had said and done. We'll look also for the report, which would be, I see, available. And for that, I'd like also to draw your attention to the interview we've made with Elmira Ablalimova, who is the wife of the deputy head of the Crimean Tatar Mejlis, Ahtem Chiygoz, who is already arrested for more than 2 years with a false accusation of creating the public disruption, while there is a video which is confirming that he was doing actually the opposite at the moment of the annexation, trying to calm down the people. And she explained to us what is the life for her, what is her situation and the situation of her compatriots.
It is impossible to understand how this could happen at this time, in our time, that this could happen to us, before our eyes. It's very difficult to talk about. My generation was born in deportation. I was born in Uzbekistan. But we were raised knowing our homeland was Crimea, and that we must return there. Our parents did everything they could so that we could return. When we returned, we didn't ask for our homes or property back. We went to the authorities and said, give us land, we'll build, and we'll live.
Мы к власти обращались и говорили, дайте нам землю, мы построимся, будем жить. А в 2014 году, знаете, вот для меня...
In 2014, they suddenly denied us entry to the other side of the barricade. They denied us the people there with whom we associated, who we considered our friends. Our points of view were in complete opposition. What seemed dangerous for us seemed very good for them, and for the first time, I remember it very well, we lived with the feeling of being in danger, the feeling of constant tension. And then Ahtem was arrested. I don't really remember that time because it was catastrophic and unpleasant for me. I just didn't know what to do at that moment, what actions to take. How did this happen? Why? What for? But after a while, I grew tired of being afraid. Now we live and are very conscious of the fact that we didn't steal anything from anyone. We are living on our land, and moreover, we have the right to live on this land.
И мы боремся за это право жить на этой земле. Еще больнее видеть какие-то сумасшедшие.
It's even more painful to see these crazy plans that individual politicians are working on, saying that Crimea should be leased to Russia for 50 years, 100 years, and so on and so forth. They are strongly provoking us, and that's why I just want to scream and say we are not serfs to be put up for rent. We are the owners of this land, and we should be able to decide this question the way we want. Ask us. But we also understand that Ukraine is going through hardships because there is a war in the east. People are being killed. But we really hope that society, politicians, and the president of Ukraine will do everything in their power to get back Ukraine's territorial integrity and become a strong European state.